Julie, if you could hit record. Good afternoon and welcome to this presentation on internationalizing STEM education for broader impacts. My name is Miles McNall and I'm the Director for Community Engaged Research in the Office of University Outreach and Engagement at Michigan State University. If you have questions for our speakers today, we invite you to enter them into the Q&A box. General comments, reactions, and resources can go into the chat. Keeping these things separate helps us keep better track of your questions and make sure they get answered. There are 5 learning objectives for today's presentation, each addressed by a different set of speakers. DeAndra Beck will provide a big picture orientation to what we mean by international STEM education as a strategy for achieving broader impacts of research and how this connects with NSF priorities. Doctors Krajcik, Tarabara, and Cunningham will discuss their own experiences in conducting and assessing international STEM education projects. Dr. Bartzis will highlight promising practices in international STEM education. Doctors Dirks, Sheely, and Von Schneider will discuss tools for assessing outcomes in international STEM education. And I'll wrap up with some resources to consult in planning and assessing international STEM education. I now turn it over to Dr. DeAndra Beck, Associate Dean for Research, International Studies and Programs at MSU.
Thank you so much, Miles, and it's good to be with all of you here this afternoon. I'm going to apologize in advance. We've got some mowing out on the central greens outside, so hopefully there won't be too much noise and interfering with the presentation. I did want to share with you all that prior to arriving here at Michigan State 7 years ago, I had spent 6 years in the National Science Foundation as a program director in the Office of International Science and Engineering. So the comments that I'm drawing from today kind of have me stepping back from my associate dean role and kind of a conversation that I might have had I been a program officer and talking to you all about STEM education and the NSF context for international activities and broader impacts. Next slide, please. So I think it's important to get a sense at the National Science Foundation for what they consider to be international activities. And basically they put this information in 5 general categories. If you want to explore this further, I've added some links into the presentation, and I'm sure that Dr. McNall will probably be circulating a copy of everybody's presentation if you all have a need to kind of dive deep or to refresh your memories here. So basically the 5 kinds of international activities that NSF points out is as priority for them are first, the US participation in global scale projects and large global research networks. And there are several funding opportunities that actually foster this research coordination networks, among them ExcelNet, et cetera. So there are several mechanisms to achieve that. Secondly, as many of you know, NSF supports a lot of international facilities, whether it's the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland or the Gemini South Astronomical Facility in Chile, big facilities, physics facilities around the country. So that's another opportunity for US scientists to go overseas to conduct research. The third is that there are a lot of intergovernmental programs that NSF facilitates for joint science and technology collaboration and joint programs to work on. Some of you may be familiar with the US-Israel Binational Research Foundation programs that NSF administers. That's a classic example of one of those programs. I highlighted in yellow because of today's conversation, the emphasis that they want to invest in support for new scientists and engineers, particularly allowing them to do their research internationally and to provide them a global context for their research. And then lastly, international science engineering information, so that especially through their data portal and the science statistics that are published, these are NSF's 5 priorities. Next slide, please. So within the National Science Foundation, the Office of International Science and Engineering is really a focal point for activities and really a go-to place for you all. If you have questions about this, I strongly urge you to prepare a short summary of what you'd like to do and email your program officer and talk to him or her about your interests ahead of time. But OISC has 3 very specific priorities. And the first one, of course, is very relevant here, promoting the development of a globally competent U.S. workforce. They also try to facilitate and support international partnerships and networks and to provide opportunities for U.S. leadership to shape global science and engineering agenda. All of these you can see are a reflection of NSF's priorities. And certainly within NSF, the OISC programs that many of us are quite familiar with here on campus are the International Research Experiences for Students and the Partnerships for International Research and Education, both which have a very strong STEM component. Next slide, please. To just summarize for you all what the broader impacts dimension of your NSF proposal is. I'm sure you all are familiar with this in general, but it's really, really important to see how strongly NSF is emphasizing this. And this is part of the intellectual merit and broader impacts conversation that happens in every single proposal. So, you know, when you're writing your NSF proposal, you're obligated to address both. So the broader impacts can be accomplished through the research itself, but they may be complementary to the project. And I want to point out some of the outcomes that NSF deems to be societally relevant are full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minorities in a project. They are very interested in STEM education and educator development at any level. And of course, public literacy and public engagement with science and technology are also highly valued by the foundation. Next slide, please. So I want to give you all a few tips as we start getting in here to think about your proposal development, and as you're thinking about putting in your broader impacts and how you want to internationalize STEM education, if that's an objective of yours. As I mentioned, both intellectual merit and broader impacts are important to your proposal. Many of you know that the funding rates at NSF are not high. They can average 12 to 15%, sometimes lower in some programs. So that means that very, very slim margins separate the 12 to 15 out of 100 proposals that are funded in most programs. So paying attention to broader impacts can actually tip the scale for you. My observation is that many principal investigators spend about 80% or more of their 5-page limit on the intellectual merit of their research activity and often give cursory attention to broader impacts. And when I see very formulaic broader impacts that are not very innovative, I'm going to give you some examples of those. They're kind of throwaways in many, many proposals. I'm going to incorporate research findings in my courses. I'm going to hire a diverse staff or students, but I don't tell you how I'm going to do it. I'm going to present at national or international meetings. My area of research is inherently helpful to society. Yes, it's true, all of these are legitimate broader impacts, but again, they're very formulaic and they don't demonstrate a lot of creativity or innovative thinking that can actually position you to be more successful. So my big tip is be as creative in your broader impacts as you are in your research endeavor. Considering options for international engagement for undergrads or grads or postdocs is often well received by NSF program officers if there is very good preparation, oversight, and some assessment of impact. And that's kind of what today's conversation and panel is going to be about. Next slide, please. And this is my final slide before transitioning. I did want to put, again, we'll be sending out copies of these to you all, but if you're interested more in learning about what NSF's looking for on broader impacts, the first link will be helpful. There's a terrific group that Miles and Lori Van Negeren and others at MSU have been involved in, the Center for Advancing Research, Impact, and Society. And it's a terrific resource guide for you. That's the second link. The third is some tips from NSF about how to make a broader impact statement. It's kind of their beta site. And so I put that link in as well. So that's the big picture of why this is important. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Miles.
Thank you, DeAndra. I turn it over now to Marianne Walker, consultant to the Institute for Global Health and the College of Osteopathic Medicine at Michigan State University, and our moderator for the 3 case studies of international STEM education. Marianne.
Thank you, Miles. Thanks, DeAndra. So we're going to get started this afternoon by hearing about some innovative practices going on right here on our own campus. And we've invited some top leaders that have been working in STEM evaluation and assessment for many years. We're going to start our conversation this afternoon with Joe Kraychek from the Create for STEM Center here in the College of Education. Joe serves as the director of Create for STEM and is the Lappin Phillips Professor of Science Education. In his role as director, he works with faculty, teachers, and researchers to improve teaching and learning of science, math, and engineering from kindergarten through college by engaging innovation and research. Joe's been focusing with science teachers to design and test learning environments, to reform science teaching practices, and research student learning and engagement in project-based learning environments. He has an extensive global background in research, working in Israel, Korea, and other countries. With that, I welcome Joe to talk to us about this case study Joe's going to present. You are muted, Joe.
Thank you so much, Marianne, and thank you for that reminder. I tend to always forget that. The project I'm going to talk to you about today is with some work that I've done with my very close colleague here on campus, Barbara Snyder, and with my colleagues, Jari and Katarina from Helsinki. We were fortunate enough to receive a 5-year PIRE award. PIRE stands for Partnerships in International Relations, Partnerships in International Research and Education. And the name of our project was actually called Crafting Engagement in Science Environments. Next slide, please. And I wanted to just speak a little bit about what PIRE is all about. PIRE cuts across the directorates at NSF, and it's basically to bring together researchers to really tackle really pressing problems that exist in both countries and globally. And so it's really to try to catalyze thinking and bring solutions to problems. Next slides. So what was our challenge? And many of you might find this very interesting, but I think you may know that Finland tends to be very high when it comes to international achievement on a variety of different measures. What many of you don't know is that for a very small country, even though their students score very high on international measures of international achievement in STEM, which is great, their interest in going on further in studying STEM is very low. So while they are very successful at doing good, they don't necessarily want to continue. Now, if you're a tiny country, you got to be really worried about that. That was the problem that Finland brought. And of course, in the United States, we're also worried about, we tend to actually have a lot of kids who want to keep going on in STEM, except we don't score that high. So we almost have the opposite problem. We as a nation need to prepare our students to have deeper knowledge of how to use STEM. The Finnish problems was really, how do I really engage kids so they really want to continue to work? And so our project really focused on, could we bring together international leaders in STEM education and in educational psychology to try to figure out both how to improve student engagement in science, but also really improve their understanding of science itself, so that kids can actually develop the competencies that they will need to live in the 21st century in order to solve problems, to make decisions, and think innovatively. Next slide, please. So the goals of our prior project, or crafting engagement in science environment, was to support teachers in developing learning environments that really enhance optimal learning moments for students in secondary physics and in chemistry class. Now, I use the word enhancing optimal learning environment, and you could substitute that for engagement. It's like the term optimal learning means kids are really into wanting to learn this. They show high interest, they have but they're challenged, and they're developing skills in that areas. And so we worked with teachers both in the United States and in Finland to really try to think about how can we change our science teaching environments. And again, this was in high school chemistry and physics. So kids would really have this desire to learn. We picked a focus on project-based learning, where kids were involved in making sense of phenomena or solving some interesting design problem that they really personally found that they find valuable. And our goal, as I said, was really to enhance both academic learning, but also engagement, interest, and creativity. And of course, what we need is some evidence. Do these methods really work? So we conducted what's referred to as an efficacy study. Next slide. So in the United States, we did create an efficacy study to see how good our materials really were. We were able to conduct that study both in Michigan, in southwestern California, both in LA and districts just south of San Diego. And so we had 61 schools, half of which were treatment schools and half of which were control schools. And then we were able to compare where kids who experienced the treatment, i.e. who both received these curriculum materials, but the teachers also had professional development, how did they do? And we were so fortunate to see an extremely large increase in this in kids' understanding of some challenging concepts in physics and chemistry. This was not a whole year study. This was a portion, basically a half a year study. But within that half a year study, we really saw some powerful impacts in students making very important gains in their knowledge of science learning. Next slide, please. What's really important, because this was a prior study, was that, and it was a collaboration between the US and Finland, everything that we did in the United States was also replicated in Finland. You should know that we met on a weekly basis to talk to the PIs as well as the graduate students and postdocs to talk about what we were doing. And so and we also traveled to Finland quite frequently, at least once a year. And the Finns and their group also traveled to us at least once a year. So we had a lot of collaboration. Finland, as I said, did whatever they also did what we did here. They also conducted their own cluster randomized trial to see how students in Helsinki reported. Their findings were also very positive. The Academy of Finland, as how the prior agreements work, actually provided the Finns, our Finnish colleagues, with enough support so they could actually duplicate this work. And very importantly, this work with the Finns led to new collaborations for them and for us. Next slide, please. So what are some of the challenges of doing this work? Well, one is working across time zones. So when it's morning here, it's afternoon there. And so we have to, and that's sometimes tricky given our academic schedules as well. But you can work those kind of things out. There's also language barriers. I visited schools in Finland. And even though, it's physics and chemistry, and we do a lot with representations in both those disciplines, I don't know the Finnish language, and I don't think I would ever be able to learn the Finnish language. So there is this language barrier, because I know I would have personally been able to I would have loved to be able to read what they actually produced. The Finns, on the other hand, most of them have fairly good English language speaking skills. But for me, the challenge was this language barrier. There's also time for international travel. As I said, we traveled there and they traveled here. And of course, that takes time out of our busy work schedules. And then there's funding. So while the prior funding was certainly generous amount of funding, you really never quite have enough to get what you really want to get accomplished. But there's also, with those challenges, however, there's also lots of benefits. And of course, one of the greatest benefits is really learning new ideas and having new experiences. So when you're talking with people who are in your field, but have very different experiences and went to different kind of schooling than you did, you really learn a lot by collaborating with them and working with them. So the sharing of academic knowledge and developing new knowledge is perhaps one of the greatest benefits you can acquire in these kind of relationships. Of course, you also learn a new culture, which is very fascinating, traveling over there, learning about their culture. You also get new opportunities. For instance, extending this work to with colleagues in other parts of the world. We are, for instance, through this prior opportunity, I was also able to extend some other work dealing more with assessment to Taiwan. So it spawns these new opportunities with other people throughout the world. Next slide, please. So one of the, you might say, benefits for this is you really do get, you get to work and publish some peer, papers and work. So you get to co-author with colleagues from a different country, which is really an interesting kind of experience. We were actually very fortunate to get out of this effort, an entire book with the 4 PIs as the authors of the book. And the Finns actually held a book launch in Finland for us to release our book. Unfortunately, this all happened when COVID was happening, just to let you know. So the book launch really never took place the way we were hoping the book launch would take place. Next slide. And of course, the other benefit, and this really speaks a lot to those broader impacts. We, as part of our prior work, we had lots of international partnership exchanges with teachers and with administrators. And so they very frequently would bring along 2 or 3 teachers and some administrators when they visited with us. And we would also likewise bring teachers and administrators from United States schools to Finland. And these provide really very broad experiences for everybody in the projects to really learn about how can you really improve the teaching and learning of STEM for all students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. That's a wonderful example of the Partnerships for International Research and Education through the National Science Foundation. That's a terrific program that's been operating. Our next speaker, Dr. Vlad Tarabero, is also going to be sharing a program that he's been working in for many years. That's also happens to be a PIR. Let me introduce Vlad. Vlad is a professor of environmental engineering, and he also serves as the associate director in the Center for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies here at Michigan State. Vlad has been working in Tbilisi, Georgia, Singapore, France. His slide here depicts many of the locations that he's been working in: Turkey, Republic of Georgia, Russia. So Vlad's got terrific experience to share with us today about assessing this broad-based research programming.
Thank you, Marianne, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'll talk about PIR projects. We had 2, and thank you to Joe for introducing the PIR program. So we had we were one of the first of the 12 first teams which received PIR back in 2005, and then we had a follow-up PIR in 2013. So almost uninterrupted, say 14 years of PIR work in different locations and on rather different subjects, although in both cases these were engineering proposals. So I'll give you a kind of brief cursory or review of our approach, practices that worked well for us, and a few kind of key lessons that we've learned. So the first PIRE was on development of a new water quality control technologies. And in both cases, it was about creating, as I think DeAndra mentioned earlier, creating these global scale projects and research networks. In both cases, that's what we were trying to do. The first project was with Ukraine, Russia, and France. And the second one, let me see, next slide, please. And the second one, thank you, was with France, Turkey, and Singapore, with some overlap in partners. And both partnerships involved significant participation from industry. And so the second, for example, project topically was on the question of what effects, what impact global commercial activities have on water resources. So for example, we can ship oil from overseas, from Middle East, for example, or we can develop shale in gas in Pennsylvania. And in both cases, there are environmental risks and technologies that we can sort of deploy to mitigate those risks. And so weighing this mix of options and deciding what is better for the environment is one of the things that was sort of central to is the theme which was central to the second PIRE. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so what we came to realize by the end of the first PIRE is that this may be obvious, but this international research projects funded by NSF is truly an untapped resource. In fact, PIRE primarily supports graduate research and education. They do allow for some undergraduate research funding, but it's mostly graduate research. And so this large investment, millions and millions, is fairly untapped as far as classroom is concerned, especially undergraduate classroom. And so what this slide shows, the blue, sort of the bottom part of this slide shows some ideas on how we can use this huge investment into research to benefit the classroom. Again, I think these slides will be available for everybody to look at. I know this is a busy slide, so I'm not going to dwell on it for long, but we thought about various ways of using this funding for classroom benefit, and this diagram here outlines some of these ideas, again, very cursory. Next slide, please. So yes, so what worked well for us? So we were kind of opportunistic with our project. So we had visits on a need-based. So whenever there was a need to measure something, to do some research at a location abroad, whether because expertise is unique over there, let's say in France or in Singapore, or some unique resources available just there at that particular time of the year, we'd schedule a visit. We were kind of purposefully flexible with our project design. It was hardcore soft shell, so had a few key partners, but then the partnership grew, much like this AxelNet idea that NSF champions now as a formal program. We eventually developed into some sort of a network of networks. So we looked at students as catalysts. We let them form teams and come up with ideas. And this actually worked quite well for us. Somewhat unexpectedly, this experiment turned out to be very productive, useful for students as well. So each student has international co-advisors on the guidance, graduate Ph.D. guidance committee. And we really try to tap at the complementary resources. Next slide, please. So this table illustrates, and this went into the proposal, maybe a big reason we got funded actually. So here we say, okay, these are our partner institutions. ITU is Turkey, NUS NTU is Singapore, and CIRES is in France. And then IRT means interdisciplinary research team. Think of it as a thrust in the project. And so we identified what is it that they have that we don't domestically that necessitates this type of partnership. And this resonated with the reviewers. This was clear from the reviews. And it just made sense for students. It justified this large investment of federal funds, and students enjoyed taking advantage of these otherwise unavailable opportunities. Next slide, please. And so as far as challenges, Well, one is that NSF only funds US side of collaboration. And so if you work with, for example, Finland or France, this isn't such a large handicap. But with some other partners, it's a problem. And so it takes a deliberate effort to balance this collaboration, help them raise money. Assessment can be difficult if student numbers are low. We eventually relied on a team of external evaluators so that they could handle this complexity of small numbers and provide useful feedback, both formative and summative to us. Student recruiting can be somewhat challenging. Some students saw it as a bit of a burden, and some are just excited to jump on the opportunity and travel abroad. You never know, you find out later. Next slide, please. So lessons, I have 2 slides left. This is kind of penultimate one. And so one is that the biggest benefit for the students is this large network that they form, that they rely on as they look for jobs and later on. One of the evaluation criteria we used was the number of reference letters our international partners wrote for US graduates, PhD graduates upon graduation. So one thing we realized is, at least in our field, it's important this is an opportunity to help students develop into culturally adaptive global citizens. In other words, not zeroed in on a particular culture or language, but being able to have the tool set to travel wherever and do work in this in a productive way, being culturally aware of all potential difficulties of intercultural communication. Many ways of taking advantage of student travel abroad. Oftentimes these opportunities come up on the go where you realize, oh, there's this workshop they can attend. It takes time for students to grow into their student teams and mature and become productive. And then finally, this was a big plus for us for recruiting. We managed to recruit excellent students with other universities, top 10 competing for them, and we recruited them. UDF fellows were amongst them, for example. Next slide, please. This is the last slide. Let me see what I wanted to say here. So regional centers were very helpful for us by helping us with boot camps, providing cultural context before students go there. Things like how to get around sort of boot camp language instruction, general information about the region where we're going. It still takes a good, faculty champions, faculty with requisite cultural skill set, language, hopefully experience in the region. Let me see. What's one important thing was apprenticeship. So I learned from this as a graduate student. I traveled, I spent a lot of time in France as a graduate student. And then I learned from my advisor and helped me with getting this PIRIS funded as a co-PI. But then my student, who is now a faculty member at Louisiana State, we got IRIS funded together with him, which is another NSF project. I passed on some of the knowledge I've had to him, and he's getting his international projects going. So this is very valuable experience. And finally, what worked for us well as a way of establishing common language with international partners are courses on laboratory safety, responsible conduct of research, as a way of stitching these collaborations along these critical boundaries. Worked very well for us in all PIRIS and actually in the IRIS, which is ongoing. Thank you. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Vlad. Now we've seen 2 wonderful examples of how our researchers have organized internationalizing STEM, and both of those have been examples from the National Science Foundation. We're now going to pivot and hear from a researcher that's got great examples from another region of the world. We're going to talk about Uganda in just a minute. Let me introduce Dr. William Cunningham, who is the director of the Institute for Global Health. He's also the associate dean in the College of Osteopathic Medicine. And Bill has been, he's an emergency doctor who's been working for 26 years in the field of osteopathic medicine. He's a lifelong medical education involvement. He's been working in continuing education with health organizations. He has a master's in health administration, and he serves in several nonprofits and NGOs. Bill's going to talk to us today about some unique broader impacts in advancing research in society, giving us a case study from Uganda. Welcome, Bill. You are muted, sir.
Okay, how's that? Thank you very much, Marianne. I'd like to, those 26 years that I spent in emergency medicine, 15 of those were involved with the underserved in U.S. communities like working with natural disasters, and then internationally with needs assessments and medical missions. So as an osteopathic physician, I just like to comment that I bring a broader definition of health, and that's important for everyone here because you do not have to be a physician to make a difference in the health of someone. And when I give my presentations to different colleges, whether it's natural resources or engineering or social sciences, I say to the students, I tell them that 90% of the people here on the face of the earth, their definition of health is a safe dwelling place, where their next meal is coming from, a living wage, infant and maternal well-being. So all of us in whatever discipline we choose can make an impact of that, because that literally makes an impact on their health. They don't necessarily need a doctor, an MRI or a CT scan. What they do need is all of our support and hope for a better day by providing them access to some of those basic needs. And so if there's students listening to all of us here, all of you can make a difference in the world, in what all of us have been trying to do here for years. So just a real brief mention of the Institute for Global Health, which originally 27 years ago was deemed the Institute for International Health. And its mission was education, research, and capacity building. And we've been at that for 3 decades now. Our first funded projects were internationally were schistosomatiasis in Egypt, Bulgaria, the treatment of cardiovascular disease, environmental sciences in Japan. And that's just to mention a few of them. One of them that I really like to mention is Malawi, where an internal medicine resident went over there to look at cerebral malaria, and now has been there for 27 years. And she's the foremost expert, Dr. Terry Taylor, on cerebral malaria, pediatric cerebral malaria. So the Institute for Global Health really is a facilitator. What we want to do is bring their colleges and academic units at Michigan State University together to have sustainable projects globally. And what I'm going to do is I have a 1-slide storyboard that on the collaboration of the College of Engineering, Institute for Global Health, and College of Veterinary Medicine to show our viewers how the start of a discussion led to a very robust research project with 5 publications and multi-million-dollar implications for Michigan State University and the state of Michigan, and who knows, probably the world if this project keeps going. So if you'll bring that storyboard up, please. And while Miles is doing that, I would like to mention Marianne Walker, because if her memory serves her well, she will remember that Dr. Kanedi in the College of Veterinary Medicine, Irene Zadaraki in the College of Engineering, and myself were sitting around our Global Health Committee talking about ways in which we could integrate a One Health project. And Uganda came up because Dr. Kanedi was finishing a project on tuberculosis in cattle in Uganda. So Marianne Walker brought us together, and we funded a project which initially was looking at wastewater, viral illnesses in wastewater, and so out of that Uganda project, the first publication, you can move to that, please, was Viral Diversity and Abundance in Polluted Waters in Kampala, Uganda. And what we did was we looked at 5 different locations researchers did over the course of 2 months, and sampled the wastewater treatment plant in Kampala, as well as effluent and influent wastewater, and one of the swamps outside of Uganda. And what came out of that was that we identified that viruses in the wastewater, particularly human viruses, that we could identify: hepatitis, enterovirus, rotavirus. There's one other that I'm forgetting right now. But that research that we did on that and the subsequent article led us to surmise, can we predict outbreaks using wastewater surveillance? And so, again, we started looking into, if we were going to have a surveillance model, what would it look like? And came up with the idea of, what if we looked at public health records of these viruses, or particular hepatitis at the time, and see if we could get any type of correlation from the wastewater and the spikes in what public health was seeing, because hepatitis is a reportable disease. And so what came out of that was we met with the water department in Detroit and the public health people. And my background in clinical medicine, I was talking with the public health people, and we developed a research project where we would look at the viruses in the wastewater treatment plant in Detroit, which at that time was the largest wastewater treatment plant in the United States. It treated over 3 million people in the surrounding Detroit area, and came up at that time with a pretty good research that showed that we identified spikes in hepatitis and other viruses anywhere from 7 to 14 days. We've identified them in the wastewater anywhere from 7 to 14 days before they saw it clinically. So when we look at what public health traditionally has done, is you get sick, you go in to see a provider, and whether that's in the public health department or your primary care provider, ER, urgent care, and they do a sample of whether it's sputum or blood, and say, oh, yes, this is hepatitis, this is RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, and then they make the diagnosis. Well, if this is a very, very virulent disease, the cat's already out of the bag. So, we're doing it after the patient already has the disease. So what we're looking at right now, and you can go to the next one, please, Miles, is how can we predict this? We have very, very good research that says, yes, we think we can predict this. So the next one, please, is that we were able to get an $800,000 grant from the city of Detroit, which basically led into further identification of being able to, through this surveillance method of wastewater, look at these viruses. Now, during this period of time, a sentinel event happened, which was COVID outbreak. So what did we do then? We sort of shifted what we were doing in terms of the research. And will you put the next slide up, please, Miles? And we're given a $2.4 million, College of Engineering was given and Irene Zadaraki was given a $2.4 million grant between the state of Michigan Environmental Science Division and a water quality for-profit. And they are currently now feverishly going over all of that data. So the takeaway from this storyboard is that you had 3 faculty members getting together with 4 faculty members getting together and talking about, okay, this One Health concept of how animal, human, environmental, and ecological issues, how can we study those holistically? And we started with a small $40,000 grant in Uganda. And 4 years later now, we now have a proposal that was submitted to the National Science Foundation with having a very larger concept on wastewater reporting and surveillance with the Dominican Republic and Peru, the College of Engineering, and the Institute for Global Health. We'll hear back from NSF sometime in December. So it just further points out that, you know, if any of you listening have some type of big idea, even a small idea, okay, whether you're a physician or a student, faculty member, researcher, with a big or small idea that needs a spark, you know, Volodymyr was saying you need a champion. So everyone needs a champion when you make these projects, to make these projects work. So the Institute for Global Health would help you in that. ISP would help you in that. You know, we have so many resources on campus that want to put people together to make a difference in our world, and that's the message that I hopefully have brought to the last few minutes of talking about this little storyboard of what happened 4 years ago.
Thank you, Bill. That's an excellent example of broader impacts in advancing research in society and how many get to benefit from all of the wonderful research that's happening here at Michigan State, but you've given a pathway forward, and hopefully our audience can get a sense from the panelists where they can reach out. Anybody on the panel would be happy to talk to you about organizing your broader impacts statement and thinking about it, as DeAndra pointed out, early on in your proposals. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Opal Bartzis. Opal is the Executive Director of the Education Abroad Office here at Michigan State University, and Opal's going to talk to us about research in education abroad. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So in this section, which I'll try to keep fairly brief, I'll be touching on education abroad as a promising practice in internationalizing STEM education. For some context, the professional educational field abroad has long been focused on increasing participation among STEM students, an underrepresented student type in education abroad. This underrepresentation has been confirmed on an ongoing basis by the annual Open Doors report, which is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State and implemented by the Institute for International Education. It's the only report in existence on the analysis of official data on education abroad participation rates, experience types, and student demographics across the US as reported by higher education institutions of all kinds. And because education abroad goes hand in hand with intercultural learning, it's relevant to our discussions today. At the same time, we're seeing increasingly that STEM educators recognize the value of education abroad in advancing STEM education outcomes. And some institutions like MSU have been at this for quite a long time. For the last several years, in fact, the number of MSU STEM students has outpaced national averages, again, as confirmed by Open Doors reports. So with not enough time to describe all of the STEM-focused education abroad initiatives that we have, I'll highlight just a few today. And on the next slide, please. 3 initiatives are listed that relate to the College of Engineering and education abroad in Spain. Engineering has a multifaceted relationship associated with MSU Professor Carl Bollert with the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, the top-ranked technical university in Spain. First, an exchange agreement allows MSU students to complete a semester in Spain and Polytechnic students to complete a semester at MSU. In both cases, students enroll in courses right alongside local degree-seeking students taught by local faculty, with credits returning to their home institutions. And importantly, they gain understanding about what it means to be educated as a STEM student within the context of the host culture. As one particularly innovative option, however, the Summer Engineering in Madrid program Students spend the summer taking a combination of courses taught on-site in Spain by Dr. Bollert and MSU's Dr. Thomas Beeler, who travel with the group. And these are sophomore engineering classes that are available to students from several different disciplines. They also take a course in Spanish, although prior knowledge of Spanish is not a required component of the program. And they can engage in research through an independent study paired with a local Spanish faculty member. Additionally, while there, MSU faculty are able to conduct their own research through the affiliated IMDEA, the Institutos Madrileño de Estudios Avanzados. IMDEA is a research institute for materials research. And right now, Dr. Bollert is writing a proposal to the National Science Foundation in collaboration with IMDEA to fund 7+ MSU students per year to study and conduct research in Spain for a semester beginning in fall 22. At least 2 of those 7 students each year will be graduate students. The area of focus is physical metallurgy of magnesium alloys, with a specific emphasis on processing microstructure property relationships. IMDEA has EU funding for this, and they're quite interested in our students, so this grant proposal has important potentials. Another program of note is Comillas, the Comillas Pontifical University, which is another exchange program. Participants are usually material science students, but can come from a variety of engineering areas. MSU students typically augment their semester exchange program with a research experience there through an independent study while paired with a local faculty member in English. So Spanish language study is not required, although always encouraged in this program and in any education abroad program. MSU students often engage with local grad students and postdocs at Comillas, which is an important intercultural benefit of the program. These programs were started in 2012 and have been running continuously since then. The Summer Engineering in Madrid program in particular has had a strong uptake with over 100 students in total having completed it. On the next slide, the other program model I'll mention briefly is one that is not administered by MSU, but is an important part of the STEM portfolio of education abroad offerings through a partner. This is what's known as a co-sponsored program. Through a partnership that MSU has had since 2017 with ARCadia, one of the oldest and most respected education abroad organizations, MSU students from a variety of academic areas are able to complete a summer of study and research at any of the ARCadia locations listed here. So we have England, Scotland, Ireland, Spain, and Australia. In each program, ARCadia partners with a preeminent local university such as King's College London, University College Dublin, University of Glasgow, University of Queensland, to name a few. The academic areas are listed on the slide, and students are mentored in their research by local faculty. Important to note is that the lead academic college for this program is Lyman Briggs, but it's supported by engineering as well as Nat Sci and social science. And these programs have proven to be increasingly popular with our students, even leading to student-authored academic publications in scientific journals, and most definitely enriching discussions in the MSU classrooms to which the participants return. What's most important is that student impact, making a tangible difference in the lives of our students. It's something that I know those of us in ISP feel particularly strongly about, cultivating global citizens, but we do so in collaboration with the academic colleges and other MSU partners. And with that in mind, I'd like to share these comments from a past MSU participant of the summer program in Madrid that I mentioned, a biosystems engineering student who said, "We had the opportunity to hear from local engineering professors and then tour their labs. As someone who's done research for 2 years at MSU, I enjoyed the lab tours the most. And talking to Spanish professors who were doing research in the same field as me brought a new perspective to the work I'm doing. It showed me that people around the world are working to solve the same problems as me, and if we work together, we can change the world. Traveling abroad brought added meaning to my education in America and taught me that the world isn't such a big place once you understand another culture." That student reflection seems to get at the intercultural learning that is and should be at the core of education abroad programs, including STEM education programs, and it's important to develop these academic experiences with intercultural outcomes in mind and to be prepared to evaluate and assess. In the resources for this workshop, you'll find the Forum on Education Abroad Standards of Good Practice. The Forum is the standards development organization for the field of education abroad as designated by the US Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission. The standards, as they're called, provide guidance for all aspects of sound education abroad development and delivery, including attention to intercultural learning. So I would encourage anyone who engages with or plans to engage with education abroad to consider them. And so I think this is a nice segue to John, Craig, and Elizabeth, who will address methods and tools in the assessment of international learning.
I just pick it up here, Marianne.
Yes, please go ahead.
So hi, everybody. If you're like me, your head is undoubtedly spinning by now and probably will be spinning even more by the time that we finish. But what I would like to share with you is a little bit of a different perspective with respect to international education, particularly around STEM, and call this a theory break in the panel, if you will. So I'll share with you a little bit of theory and how to think about what it is that we're trying to accomplish in international education, and then Craig and Elizabeth will talk more specifically about particular tools that they have been working with over a period of time. Next slide, please. So what I'm asking you to think about right now is to shift your perspective a little bit. We're so used to, particularly in STEM education, but education in general, we're so used to thinking about learning. If we do think about learning at all, we think about it in largely rational, sort of cognitive dimensions. And there's a substantial amount of literature that focuses on the kinds of affective and psychosocial impacts or implications that internationalizing education has for students. And that's sort of where we're picking up. We're trying to sort of understand and make sense of what it is that these emotionally laden experiences have for students when they are going abroad. So we're trying to extend the idea of broader impact to include not just the kind of instrumental or technical kinds of outcomes that you might typically be associated with, and to think about it more in terms of some broader, deeper, more fundamental kinds of issues that are important to both individuals, groups, and communities. The next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. So one of the ways to think about this is to think about the kind of internationalizing that goes on in STEM education as deep learning. I like this term deep, although it's problematic in a number of ways, but it helps us in a sense metaphorically to get beyond the idea of learning as mere acquisition of information or the acquisition of skills, or even the notion of attitudes, the traditional KSA kind of stuff that you often see in grant proposals and a whole bunch of other kinds of things. We're really trying to push the boundaries of the outcomes that are associated with internationalizing education, particularly in the area of STEM, to sort of encompass this broader area of psychosocial or affective dimensions of learning, which we know is happening. We see it all the time. We just take a visit with students or a trip with a group abroad, for example, and you'll be readily flooded with what to do with the emotional experiences that are evoked or elicited in that process. You heard some of that in a number of the cases that were presented here this afternoon, sorry. Next slide. So what I'm suggesting, and I think I speak for Craig in this regard as well, is that what we're really talking about is thinking about international education or internationalizing methods of education as transformative. What do I mean by that? It's not just learning about it's not just learning acquisition of more information or more knowledge. It's really a fundamental shift in the way that we perceive and understand and make sense of who we are, our relationships with others, and the cultural context in which we work and play on a daily basis. So it's really getting at sort of the heart of what it means to be human. And our premise is that this notion of what it means to be human has a profound effect on the kinds of outcomes that are associated with internationalization. As you try to enact these kinds of outcomes, you're going to bump into these sorts of issues. Next slide. So what we're looking at then is thinking about learning that's not just the transfer or the transmission of information. It's not just acquisition of skills through the practice and so forth and so on, but it's really a kind of learning that fundamentally restructures our sense of who we are. And Craig will talk much more about this in a few minutes. It really has to do with getting at the kinds of beliefs about the nature of knowledge, for example. You'll see oftentimes if you begin to think about this is how we make implicit assumptions about what it means to know, how it is that we come to know. And that's in many respects, oftentimes is a fairly limited understanding because there's a whole lot of things that are shaping and influencing how it is that we come to know and why we know the things that we do. So bound up within the process of internationalizing STEM education is this notion of what matters most, what knowledge is most worth knowing. We don't stop and ask ourselves that question often enough. And I sort of scare my students in my curriculum class a little bit at MSU when we begin to think about what is most worth knowing. It seems to be so overwhelming. And then finally, we also begin to think more critically and carefully about our sociocultural context. How is it that these sociocultural contexts shape and influence our understanding of what counts as knowledge and how it is that we come to understand who we are as people? Next slide. So we're bumping up against this transformative learning theory, basically helps us understand the processes that get engaged when we have students participate in internationalizing experiences. In just a second, Craig is going to talk with you a little bit about how this notion of equal integration theory or EI theory has been operationalized within much of the work that we've done together. And just to sort of give you some quick examples, we've done this with COIL, which is a collaborative online international learning program. We've looked at it in the context of a variety of other different programs as well. And so we're looking at pushing the boundaries of this in the field of education and trying to integrate this more, particularly from my perspective, in graduate education. Next slide. So when we look at the idea of equal integration theory, and also transformative learning theory, what we begin to sort of see is that there's two fundamental ways in which learning is fostered through internationalizing experiences. One is to build in and structure a series and processes of questioning and reflecting on our assumptions, on our beliefs, on our values. The transformative learning theory helps us look at that from a more qualitative perspective. EI theory looks at it from a more quantitative perspective. And then finally, we also look at the importance of engaging and dialoguing with emotion-laden experiences as well. You'll see some of that in some of the work that Craig is going to present. The idea that we can actually think about emotion-laden experiences as a context for learning, as a way in which we can learn through and from our experiences. Next slide. So this leads us to a more in-depth description and discussion of the assessment of outcomes of this kind of learning. So like, how the hell do we go about, assessing these kinds of these learning outcomes? Craig is going to share you the secret. Beliefs, events, and values inventory. So go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, hello everybody. Nice to see old, new MSU friends. I appreciate the invitation to join you for a bit. If I could go to the next slide. I know we've been at this for quite a while now. I'm going to try to be efficient. You're going to see me skip over some slides pretty quickly, knowing that they're there as part of the PowerPoint. People can look at that a little bit more. So I'm going to kind of zoom in and out of this a little bit. What I'm struck by, kind of listening to this and being engaged in really collaboration with MSU for about 15 years now. We've been at different kinds of projects and activities together. Is the themes that I heard emerge, things like the need to pay attention to impacts. How do you know that what it is that you're doing through your NSF related research, for example, is actually having an impact, or the broader range of programs that Opal presented. Then concepts of global citizenship, for example. John's notions of transformative learning. You have one of the international experts in that area right on your campus. So when we think of these concepts, these big picture concepts, these are really constructs, notions about the nature of reality. A construct like global citizenship needs to be defined operationally, meaning we need to be able to say, well, what do we mean by that? And how do we measure that in a way that we can demonstrate the thing that we're talking about? So a lot of what the bevy does, It's been around for about 30 years now, not quite getting there. About 30 years of work on this with folks all over the world. There are about 80,000 administrations of this measure at this point. And lots of different folks are involved in different kinds of activities. So I'm not going to be able in this brief time to kind of go into that in great depth, but for those of you who have no background yet, let me just give you a little bit of an overview of what the measure is. And I think you'll see these themes coming in and out, what John just talked about, the other kinds of impacts that are necessary at a grant level and so forth. So the bevy is really designed to assess a number of processes, including basic openness, receptivity to different cultures, religions, and social practices, the tendency or not to stereotype in particular ways, self and emotional awareness, and preferred but implicit strategies for making sense of why other people and cultures do what they do. One thing that's really important to think about when you read those descriptors is there's often confusion, or at least maybe not sufficient clarity on the difference between sort of direct and indirect measures of outcomes and processes of learning, growth, and change. A direct measure is something like a grade point average that's a culmination of exams and tests that culminate in a particular score. Indirect measures are measures that look at the underlying, in the jargon of our field, the underlying mediators and moderators that influence those kinds of processes and outcomes. The point is that you can't predict outcomes if you're not measuring sufficiently the kinds of underlying factors that are actually statistically predictive of outcomes. So you have to put together both direct and indirect measures as well as mixed methods approaches. I'm a big believer in both qualitative and quantitative approaches to assessment. The bevy has both types of measures built into it. And we like working with lots of other measures. So we're not assessment snobs. If you have good measures that you like working with, lovely. We bring them into those kinds of designs all the time and applaud those kinds of efforts. Next slide. So stepping back, when you're thinking about designing an assessment component, and the NSF experts, there's several on this panel at different levels, talked about some of this. When you're thinking about how do you actually do good assessment work? Well, good assessment is good intervention. Good assessment is good research. So you shouldn't think about assessment as a one-off thing or a thing that you tack on top of your project. Assessment should be deeply promoting of engagement. So good assessment is built into your programs, into your curricula. So feedback is given. Students relate to who they are as a result of assessment, rather than something that you sort of put on top of it and do to demonstrate an outcome. Build it into your programs and systems, and you'll find that what that does is it increases engagement, which is really what we have learned over the years. We're looking at STEM students in particular. It's a fascinating area because, as a number of folks commented, Opal and others commented, STEM students tend, historically at least, not to be as interested in study abroad kinds of processes. And so making this kind of content relevant and meaningful, engaging them as collaborators in learning and growth and change is really, really key. So I'm not going to go over all of this now. This is just kind of a model that we have used in other places to try to help people get their arms around what is it that you need to do when you're going to look at best practices as it relates to assessment. Next slide. So the bevy, I've already touched on this a little. I'll just mention a little bit of it, tie it back to some of what John said. We've been at this for a long time. We're now in what we call the bevy 3, the third iteration of the bevy. It's based on a pretty big sample of about 10,000, about 100 countries represented in these latest norms from all over the world. And it measures these deeper things, as John observed: development, needs, emotions, values. Basically, what we're looking at is how do human beings change? And what does that mean? So if you're talking about global citizenship, well, that's not just, as John said, knowledge that you have or skills you have. Those are necessary, but they are not sufficient if you're going to be really talking about how human beings are transformed. So these are just some of the features, the kind of work that we do. There's a report system of the bevy, which allows students and faculty, program developers to actually go very deeply into the considerations of the populations that they're involved in. Next slide. These are just some of the areas we work in with the bevy. I'm not going to go into a lot of this as well. It's implicit in much of what you've said, but you can go kind of romp all over the place. And that's just the point I'm trying to make, is that assessment should be multifaceted, and that certainly is what we do. Next slide. It's important to understand, I already touched on this, is that we tend to focus, if you don't have a background in assessment or psychometrics, it often comes to mind, well, I'll just measure some stuff. I'll ask people, well, was this meaningful to you? Is this a good thing or whatever? And I'll just take what people say back to me as though that's all I need to know. Well, that's an important part of it. And the bevy does some of that. But you have to understand that when you're asking people about whether they're impacted by an intervention, you're basically activating very core human processes, things like social desirability. Human beings want to be perceived by other people as being open. You look at our last elections, you see that process. People don't like being shamed by telling a whole group of people that you're not a very open person. They may not be an open person, but if you're trying to get people to grow and learn and change, telling them that they're not, or giving them an opportunity to demonstrate they're not, it won't be very effective at a psychometric perspective. So you have to develop measurement in a way that is not what's called face valid. If you can tell what a measure is measuring by looking at the items on the face of it, you've got yourself a problem, potentially, in terms of social desirability. And so with the bevy, we've worked very hard to evaluate it over the years. And what we really learn is that it's not a face valid measure. You can't tell what the bevy is measuring by just looking at items on its face. For this kind of research, when you're looking at how people see self and other, that's a very important thing. So looking at these mediators and moderators, underlying the results and the behaviors is what really we're tapping into. Next slide. These are just psychometrics. For any of my stats friends or psychometric folks, I'm happy to have these kinds of chats. Next slide. Just want to let you know we spent a lot of time on these important aspects of the measure. Next slide. And in the interest of time, I'm going to zap along here pretty quickly. This is the bevy. There's no way in the very limited time I have that I'm going to be able to get you through all this. But this is just the scales, 17 measures. It's what's called a grounded theory measure, meaning it came out of real comments by real people internationally, very diverse settings. And that's really what this is. It's just the structure of the bevy. So please go ahead, the next two slides. Another one. And there's the qualitative items. Some of what we're going to be talking about is from a project that developed, actually led by wonderful colleagues at MSU. And this came out of the Forum on Education Abroad. You heard Opal comment on the standards. This is the organization that is the standards organization. So we worked with them for a number of years on this project looking at called the Forum Bevy Project. So I'm going to show you some of that. Next slide. This is Elizabeth is on our call. She's going to be talking to you in a few minutes. She was our lead author on this and did a wonderful job kind of shepherding it through. You'll see some other MSU colleagues. Next slide. These are the implications that came out of that 6-year project. You're going to just touch on some of the data there quickly. Next slide. So these are some of the kinds of things to think about when you're designing your study. Whatever measure or measures you use, bevy or whatever, these are things to think about in terms of measuring impacts and outcomes and the kind of innovation that was emphasized early on in our presentation. So for example, who we are affects whether, what, and how we learn, which may seem self-evident, but until you have data to actually demonstrate that, it's just rhetoric. So next slide. Here's an example of something called a structural equation model. And what it's basically showing is we can't just look at interest or satisfaction study abroad as being the outcome that we're interested in or the impact. You have to look at the interacting variables, these mediators, and this is one of the scales on the bevy, sociocultural openness, that is further determined by these formative variables. So what kind of life history have people had? What is their ethnic background? How educated is their mother, for example? These variables are predictive of and influencing of scoring on measures like the bevy, as well as these outcomes like interest or satisfaction international ed. Next slide. We also have to, so it may become clear then, we have to really do deep assessment of who our learners are. Next slide. So for example, you can't just look at traditional measures of intercultural competence. It's necessary, absolutely necessary, but it is not sufficient. We see a lot of data all over the world where courses that are designed or programs or study abroad that are designed to produce intercultural competence, right? Awareness of, interest in, engagement with cultures that are different from one's own. From a measurement standpoint, oftentimes the problem is that people who participate in those experiences, self-select into them, are already very high on intercultural awareness and competence. So the variables that you really have to measure may have nothing to do with that. They may have to do with your affective capacity. It may have to do with attributional tendencies, critical thinking. It may have to do with your life history. And what this is showing is the interconnectedness of these different facets of self. So you can read about this later. I'm happy to talk more. Next slide. This is just showing you what those correlation matrix data are indicating. So for example, people who are high on sociocultural openness, if you look down several bullets, are more likely to indicate the capacity and inclination to experience affect, to experience emotion in self and other, and to value its expression. So you can't just look at openness to cultures as intercultural competence. You have to look at things like, how do you deal with the world of emotion? So that's the point of this. Next slide. It's possible to predict, or we can predict, for example, at MSU, we did predict this. We could predict 2 years later in a study we did at MSU, what students who was going to be interested in and satisfied by an international learning experience before they'd even taken their first class at MSU. It's not magic. It's because we're looking at this depth-based, comprehensive, integrated aspects of self from a measurement standpoint, which statistically predicts 2 years later who says they're going to be satisfied by an international learning outcome. Next slide. This is just showing the kind of variability that you see in different universities. So we should not assume that all of our students are the same. That's certainly the case at MSU. Next slide. In fact, these are 1 to 2 years. This is sort of your profile at MSU. This is your student body showing the reliability from 2 academic years based on a stratified random sample of your student body, 600 to 800 students each year. And you can see how remarkably similar your student body is. I can tell you empirically that your student body, wonderful student body, but it's very different in some cases from other student bodies. And that the same thing goes when you start burrowing down into fields like STEM fields. Next slide. So for example, here's a liberal arts college versus a STEM institution. Look down there at something like gender traditionalism, one of the scales on the bevy. You can see that the technical school, the engineering school, is at the 78th percentile for the sample of incoming freshmen, whereas at the liberal arts school, they're at the 50th percentile. This is just where students are coming into the university. So that doesn't make one group of students good or bad. It just means these are the students. And so it's really crucial to be assessing who they are before we start engaging in program development or design or delivery. Next slide. This is showing the same thing, but in a very different context. These are students in Japan, same kinds of phenomena. Look at sociocultural openness down there at the bottom for engineering versus basically humanities versus STEM kids. And you can see that the 36th percentile versus the 55th percentile starting out, that these students are selecting into the program. This is associated with why STEM students generally tend not to be as inclined to study abroad. And this happens all over the world. We see this again and again. Doesn't make them bad. It just means we need to reach them where they are. We need to meet them where they are. Next slide. So the other thing to keep in mind, if you're going to really do depth-based assessments, you have to look at educators. They're not all equal, nor are all the programs equal. Next slide. For example, this is showing 2 students or 2 teachers, outcomes from 2 faculty members teaching a STEM course, teaching STEM students in an intercultural competence course, supposedly teaching the same course, 2 different faculty, right? Students are more or less randomly assigned to both of these classes, so pretty much the same. And you can see on global engagement, for example, at time 2, the faculty member 2 shows a precipitous drop in global engagement as compared to the faculty member 1, which goes from the 30th to the 45th percentile. So the variable there, that's the change variable, is the faculty member introducing the content, right? So we have to assess these things, this level of analysis as well. Next slide. So you can also see outcomes being desirable and undesirable. Next slide. These are STEM students showing in a course designed to teach openness to cultures that are different from their own. At time 2, by the end of the course, they were less sophisticated in their attributions about their meaning-making capacity. They were more closed and defensive, basically. They were more emotionally activated, but they were statistically significantly on the bevy, less likely to be interested in engaging other students. Next slide. So what I'm going to do is just move toward the end here and head to Elizabeth so she can juxtapose what I've been presenting with another measure out there, the IDI. Just go on a couple more. You get the idea at this point. Just keep going. This is just showing variability within our student body. These 7 Ds are what came out of measurement, the things that we have to keep in mind as we're doing this. And this is another project, the Coil Bevy project, that we're also involved in. John referenced to that. Next slide. So if you want to learn more, here are more resources to explore more. We're covering a hell of a lot of content today. And so I'm going to turn it over to our colleague, Elizabeth, to talk a little bit about the IDI.
Oh, okay. Should I take it away?
It's all you.
All right. Thanks, Craig. So I just want to take a couple of minutes here at the end of our workshop today to talk about another assessment instrument. I've worked with both the Bevy and this instrument, which is called the Intercultural Development Inventory, abbreviated as the IDI. It's based on a now 35, 40-year-old model developed by Milton Bennett, known as the Developmental Model of Intercultural Sensitivity. And as you can see in this slide, what it does is it presents 5 stages of intercultural competence along this continuum. At one end, on the left-hand side of the screen, you have a mindset that is more monocultural in nature, which means basically that people tend to use their own cultural lens when looking at cultural values and practices that are different than their own. And they use their own cultural lens to identify where there is commonality and where there is difference between peoples. At the other end of the continuum, you have what's known as an intercultural or a global mindset, where there is a deep cultural awareness of difference, a deep cultural awareness and comprehension of those differences. But perhaps most importantly, there's the ability to bridge across those differences. So the IDI is an instrument that provides insight on how individuals and groups make sense of and respond to cultural differences. And it places, after you take the IDI and answer a number of questions, it places you somewhere on this continuum and within one of these 5 orientations, or in some cases on the cusp of an orientation. Next slide, please. Over the years, I've been asked to do a number of IDI administrations to both administrative units on campus as well as student groups. I've given you a sampling of the range of IDI assessments that have been done here at MSU. And one of the most exciting ways in which I work in this area is when I'm asked to do a time 1, time 2 assessment for an education abroad program. So this time 1, time 2 means essentially that we do the assessment before the program departs, at pre-departure, and then we do it when the group returns. And we compare those 2 results to see if there has been any measurable impact on the group or the individual's intercultural competency. I want to talk briefly about one of those programs and assessments that I did because some interesting results were observed, and I'll just take a minute to do so. During spring break 2013, a new program to Vietnam, which was sponsored by the College of Ag and Natural Resources and the Department of Animal Science, took place. Now, a unique feature of this program was the intentional interaction between undergraduate students and extension educator professionals. There were 8 participants in total. 4 were undergraduate students and 4 were extension educators well into their careers. And at MSU, this kind of diversity amongst participants, diversity in age, in educational level, and interest is not very typical. Indeed, at the pre-departure orientation session, the group identified this very diversity as a potential area for concern. They were concerned whether their individual goals and interests could be accommodated within such a diverse cohort of travelers. The Time 1 IDI was completed 6 weeks prior to departure, and the post-IDI was completed 3 weeks after the group's return to the United States. And as is not uncommon for these programs, there was very little difference in cultural competency as measured by the IDI between Time 1 and Time 2. There are many reasons why we could postulate why this is. It could be the length of the program. 8 days in Vietnam is not very long. It could be the depth and the amount of intercultural exposure during the program itself, or it could even be the timing of the Time 2 administration, too soon after departure for any meaningful learning to have taken place. Next slide, please. However, what is interesting in this case is that the IDI measures as well what is known as a range of developmental orientations within a group. So this is a sample here of what such a range would look like. The range suggests how a group will respond when confronted with various situations. A narrow range means that there will be a more consistent perspective amongst group members, and a wider range indicates a lack of consensus within the group on how they will respond to perceived cultural differences. Prior to departure, at Time 1 administration, the group displayed a wide range of orientations across 4 of the 5 possible orientations on the IDI. Upon return, the results of the Time 2 administration show that the group narrowed the range to 3 orientation, and that higher percentages within one orientation were prevalent. We don't exactly know why this is. However, one could postulate that a group as diverse as this one had had a common experience, and this may have impacted how individuals answered the Time 2 IDI. Perhaps during that common experience, the group needed to, on the ground, determine ways to work together, resulting in a narrowing of the range at Time 2 administration. So although this 8-day program did not seem to fundamentally alter the group's intercultural competence as measured by the IDI, it did indicate an increased ability of the group to respond to cultural differences in a consistent and unified manner, if only slightly. I'll end by saying that if you are interested in learning more about the IDI website is listed on your handout of resources and contains a treasure trove of valuable information, including testimonials and case studies that you may find interesting. Thank you.
All right, thank you to all of our speakers. It's time now to open it up for questions. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. If you have questions, please place them in the chat. I don't see any open questions right now. Okay. I'll wait just 1 more minute. Well, that's remarkable. That was a lot of information and no questions. You all did an excellent job of answering everyone's questions about this important field. I'm going to move on to the last slide here. All of you should have received a resources sheet with all kinds of resources about internationalizing STEM education, from promising practices to assessment tools and assessment resources. As you exit from the webinar today, you will be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey. We would love for you to complete it so we know how you felt about today's presentation and provide suggestions for how to improve it. I will check Q&A once more. And not seeing any questions, I'm going to thank all of our speakers for doing such an excellent job of covering a wide range of topics within this broader topic. and providing so many useful resources for you to use later on. And it being 4 o'clock, I'm going to close out the session. Thank you all for coming and attending today.